And we're live. It is Monday, November 18th, 8 o'clock a.m. of the year of our Lord 2024. And you are watching Dog Shirt TV, a fucking revolution in morning television. Unlike certain other morning TV hosts, I did not go to Mar-a-Lago this weekend to spend quality time with the president-elect. Instead, I drank my coffee. I read the newspaper. I did some odds and ends around the house. And I venture the guess that Eve Gaumond did not spend the weekend at Mar-a-Lago rehabbing her relationship with the former and future president. Before we get started this morning, I have a very important announcement, capital V, capital I, capital A, a VIA, very important announcement, which is that there will be no show on Wednesday. And I don't want to forget to tell you, no show on Wednesday. If you show up here 8 o'clock on Wednesday, you guys can have the chat, you can hang out, but I will not be here and no one will press the proverbial, and it is now only proverbial because the go live button is not blue anymore, but the proverbial blue go live button. And the reason is that I have a speech I have to give in New York that begins at 9 o'clock a.m. And also tomorrow evening is the 1,000th day of the full-scale invasion. And so I have a date with a certain building in Washington. And then I got to get to New York. It's going to be a super late night and a speech in the morning. So no show Wednesday. I know some of you are going to show up and be like, what happened, everybody? Why is there no show? Where is everybody? Am I in the wrong place? You're not in the wrong place. There's just no fucking show on Wednesday, okay? That is the prerogative of being I don't know what my title is in this world, but the benign paternalistic dictator of the Dog Shirt TV show, the producer, the director, the host, and most importantly, the guy with access to the account. So feel free to show up, hang out, amuse yourselves. No goddamn show. Do we understand each other? Okay. Ev, good morning.
Good morning, Ben. How are you doing?
How is life in the great snowy north?
It's not snowy at all, actually. It's climate changey. This weekend it was like, oh yeah, I'll need your translation between Fahrenheit and...
You can do the Celsius stuff. I can, most of our listeners are capable of handling it. What was the temperature like?
It was something like 11 degrees Celsius. So like,
so very, that's like, yeah, very warm. And what would you say is normal for this time of year, or normal in the before times?
Something like -4, -6-ish.
So yeah, Canada is thawing, and the great snowy north will become, as, once, it's kind of like, people in the vicinity of the Aral Sea, which basically doesn't exist anymore, still have mythologies of there being fishermen and stuff. Quebecois will still have mythologies of it being cold and they're all playing hockey and they'll be like splashing around in pools in ice skates, but it'll, basically hitting pucks with sticks and spraying each other with water.
Oh, you're joking, but recently there's a little town in like the border between Quebec and Ontario was built like a year-long ice hockey rink, but like that really is designed to give you the impression that you are like playing hockey in the full winter, but it is like you can play hockey on June 24th.
Well, I look forward to playing hockey in full winter in Phoenix, Arizona, when it's, 50 degrees outside Celsius, and which, 120 or something Fahrenheit. But, we'll have uh, uh, snow, uh, fake snow projected on the walls, falling, and it'll be glorious. Um, uh, so, Ev, what's on your mind this morning? What are you thinking about?
Well, it's a morning. I don't have much on my mind yet. I was actually wondering, what should we expect from the news? What should I be prepared to read this week in American news?
Well, that's an interesting question. So, yeah, let's think about you know, people go to the New York Times for the news that's happened. But this on Monday mornings on Dogshirt TV, we're going to do future news. So, here's what's going to happen this week. Um, First of all, we're going to have some more cabinet picks, and they're going to be, you know, things like the Treasury Secretary, things that are, a little bit less uh, splashy, at least for rule of law purposes, but super important for things like, the economy, right? Are we going to have, because if you name Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General, um, then you know it doesn't really do anything to global markets, right? It freaks out people like me. It maybe sends shockwaves through the FBI and the Justice Department, but on Wall Street they don't really care. But if you name an RFK figure to be Treasury Secretary, that actually rattles international markets. Now, uh, in the past, Trump has actually been pretty sensitive to that. So, if you'll recall, in the last administration, the Treasury Secretary was Mr. Mnuchin, who was a fairly ordinary Wall Street guy. And that was actually, he and his wife had a special, I don't know, let's say Bond supervillain vibe going for themselves. But he wasn't a out of the ordinary kind of Republican uh, um, uh, you know Treasury Secretary. If you I think it is reasonable to expect that that is sort of roughly what the markets expect from Trump. Um, and you will see them very relieved if that's what they get. A kind of normal, big hedge fund, big, Wall Streety. Um, and, one question is whether Trump is still sophisticated enough to do that, or whether he really wants, a uh, I don't know, like a tariffs fanatic to be in that role. Somebody the markets will respond very badly to a Pete Hegseth type nominee, right? Somebody who's, objectively not qualified to do it. Um, and, objectively not qualified to do it, you know, has a hobby of sexually harassing people, although
That
You know,
seems to be a prerequisite.
it does seem to be a prerequisite, although you don't want it to be a distraction if you're Trump, right? You want it to be like, it's fine if it's in somebody's background, but you don't want it to be the main story. Um, and so I think so. Watch for that on. I also think there's a short term question about whether some of these pre-existing nominees will implode. So will the Matt Gaetz report from the House Ethics Committee be voted to become public or transmitted to the Senate, or will it just leak? It's not a committee that leaks very much, but is there and I think you could say the same about, Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK, right? These are people who are already going to have issues before the Senate. Will they have, will it, are there more shoes to drop? And one of the things about, this type of nominee, if you do it in an unvetted fashion, which they did, is that everything is a surprise, right? So things that you would normally learn because an FBI agent quietly does a background, in doing background checks, knocks on somebody's door and it turns out somebody has like 8 sexual harassment or sexual. By the way, the first thing I heard about one of these nominees, and just I'm going to be uh, judicious about how I say this, but, when one of these past nominees was announced, I was at a conference and I ran into somebody in the hall who's, familiar with uh, Republican politics and knows the person and says, oh, yeah, there's a trail of sexual harassment behind. And so, these are the kind of things that FBI background checks churn up very quickly. And the result in normal circumstances is that people don't get nominated. So the stuff never comes out. If you nominate somebody without doing any of that vetting, then what happens is over the course of the few weeks after a nomination, or sometimes there's a delay and it happens before Senate confirmation hearings, Ev, there are balloons in your frame.
Yes, I have no idea what just happened.
Excellent.
I
I think random balloons uh, uh, is occasionally just showing up on Dog Shirt TV is from now on part of the. So for those who are listening to this later, Ev's frame was just covered with balloons. Is it your birthday?
It's not. I think that the AI might have picked something like birthday or happy birthday or something like that, and just like it's like when you're like thumbs upping
Yeah,
and it
when you thumbs up and then all of a sudden the AI gets excited. Well, to our AI overlords, it is not Eve Gaumond's birthday. When it is, I will sing happy birthday to her, and you'll know for sure. Um, but somebody in the chat suggests that we all sing happy birthday to Ev. No, we don't want to do that because it's not Ev's birthday and it will confuse the AI. And then forever after, on November 18th, wherever she goes, there will be birthday wishes conveyed to her. So,
can I interrupt for 1 second though?
yeah.
It will sound pretty conspirational, but like could we imagine that the reason why the nominee all tends to have like sexual harassment backgrounds in their past would be a way for Trump to ensure some sort of fidelity?
So I don't think so. First of all, I think there's a simpler explanation, which is that, first of all, sexual harassment, sexual assault, as we've all learned, um, over the past few years is much more pervasive than a lot of people, including me, thought. And but secondly, that the type of person who fashions himself an alpha male and is attracted to the self-described alpha male Trump figure is just way disproportionately likely to have grabbed and groped and, done inappropriate things. And also that because Trump very deeply doesn't care, or may even think of that sort of thing as manly, and it may even, from Trump's point of view, diminish the, I don't know, let's just say, singularity of his own situation. I think it just doesn't, I think, arise when they're picking people, when the question is, are you ferociously loyal to Donald Trump? That's not a question about your fitness with respect to other things. And it's, really not a question about whom you victimized in what sort of way in your past. So I think the Occam's razor explanation for this is very simple, which is, look, Fox News is as we know from other people who've had this, it's a viper's nest of sexual harassment. And that, by the way, when you put, and we don't do this on Dog Shirt TV, when you put women on the show with special attention to their legs, which are not the part of them that are talking when, you like it's, a show with talking heads, not talking legs. And yet you do see a remarkable amount of legs on Fox News. When that's the pardon me, the angle that the camera is interested in, why should you expect the uh, so-called talent to behave differently? So I think it's a very predictable thing. And by the way, you appoint a Matt Gaetz who is known to have been investigated for sex trafficking a 17-year-old, right? You're clearly not troubled by this. All right, so back to the news that hasn't happened yet. We're going to get a Treasury Secretary nominee. There will be some other nominees, and it will be interesting to see what if anything add to the controversy among them. And I think you'll get a sense from that actually as to whether Trump wants this sort of controversy, or at this point wants to tamp it down. And, he does, I always resist thinking about him in strategic terms, but he does have a kind of lizard brain instinct for what he can and can't get away with. And my instinct, for whatever it's worth, is that he cannot get away in the first wave with too much more. So if you imagine him appointing an RFK-like figure in the finance world to be Treasury Secretary, you may make it impossible to navigate the first 2 months of confirmation. So you may see some more normie nominees now, but I could be just wildly wrong about that. The second
And
piece of, sorry, go ahead.
what would it look like, uh, being very hard to navigate? Like, what is possible for the normie to do to prevent some?
Well, so you already have a bunch of Republican senators articulating something other than simple support, right? This is a disturbing nominee, or I'm very troubled by this, either by name or, uh, by something else, right? You could imagine people start talking about the suite of nominees, right? Or the cabinet, or people start uh, saying simply, I will not vote for, right? Like, and you already see a little of that with Gates. Um, but I think if you start hearing what you can't have if you're Trump is four Republican senators implying that the cabinet is unacceptable, as opposed to that an individual nominee is unacceptable, because that at that point it becomes a uh, we are rejecting the direction of the administration. And you know I think he is not smarter in an intellectual sense, but savvier than to let that happen. And so my gut is we will see some more normie-ish announcements over the next week or so. But would I be surprised to be wrong about that? Absolutely not. As the intelligence community says, that is a low confidence assessment. You're dealing with a highly erratic person. Um, so the second thing I want to suggest is that one thing you are going to see this week is long-range strikes by the Ukrainians against Russian targets. And the simple reason for that is twofold. Biden has, given permission for such things, and the Ukrainians are going to want to demonstrate quickly and early. First of all, they may have only 2 months of time to do that because they don't know what's going to happen January 20th. But secondly, they are going to want to demonstrate that there are effective actions they can take that will be uh, um, uh, that will show that they have been held back. And I think from their perspective, they're going to want to show Trump specifically that Biden has been weak and that unleashed they are extremely powerful. And so look for them to try to make an impression on Trump quickly. Now, whether that's like today or a week and a half, 2 weeks from now, but look for some things to happen inside of Russia that are that you wouldn't have seen a week and a half ago.
Am I wrong to say that this is supposed to be considered by Russia like the US entering into war with NATO entering into war with Russia?
Well, that's what the Russians say, but the Russians say that whenever we give the Ukrainians approval to do something that they haven't previously had approval to do. And so I don't, it is objectively not the US and NATO entering into war with Russia, right? So no US troops are firing any weapons at Russia. No US troops are stationed in Ukraine, yada, yada, yada. As a matter of international law, it is simply not true that the US is fighting Russia. What is true is that the US is openly arming a belligerent power. Now, the Russians, have some experience on the other side of that. See the Vietnam War, see, uh, any number of proxy conflicts in which we and they have armed opposing sides. And by the way, we've done it too, particularly in Afghanistan, although that was not openly done. That was a covert op. But it was a long-term covert op that we were pretty, the supplying the Mujahideen, which we did through the Pakistanis, was designed to kill as many Russian troops as possible. And so this is not it's not really a new thing. It is a relatively new thing to do it, in a former Soviet republic using very sophisticated US weapons systems. So look, objectively, we are behaving in a provocative fashion from the norms of the US-Russian relationship. Objectively, they're engaged in genocide, and so and they're threatening and openly talking about attacking NATO allies. And so, we can play games all day about who's changing the rules of the game, but honestly, I don't care who's changing the rules of the game. My view is that the U.S. needs to be aggressive about protecting our partners and our allies, and we don't need to tolerate we don't need to act like Russia is a peer power. It's not. And if we don't make clear that we will take care of our people, and that includes Ukrainians in Kharkiv, then, we will not have NATO 3 years, 5 years from now. Now, we might not anyway, because Donald Trump doesn't want to. But, that's what we voted for, apparently. And I can't really do anything about that at this point. Although, Lord and Lady Laser stand at the ready. But what we can do today, which we have now done, very belatedly, by the way, is lift restrictions on Ukrainians protecting themselves. And so that's a good thing. Look for them to take advantage of it quickly, partly by way of showing Donald Trump that they really are in this fight. Okay, that's all I got on future news. What do you expect to happen this week that hasn't that you either can or can't support, but you believe in your heart is going to happen?
Interesting question. I'm not sure I have any hypothesis. I guess I have to take my crystal ball out of the attic and polish it to improve it, because for the moment I don't think I.
Well, fair enough. If you are in the Greek chorus and you have a news of the future suggestion, come on and tell us what it is, because, we all want to know not merely what has happened and what is happening, but what is going to happen. All right, other agenda items.
Well, let's dive deeper into the Ukrainian situation. Okay, so Russia pretends that it's a war, that NATO enters into war if these missiles are sent. What does it look like? What are the thing that we'll notice in their behavior that could be signs of okay, they're not just pretending, they're actually considering this, the US entering into war?
Well, so look, it's not like they're not already doing using all the tools at their disposal. And this is the problem from a Russian point of view, is that, they've thrown literally hundreds of thousands of bodies at this problem. And the losses are just astonishingly high on the Russian side, and almost all because it's being fought on Ukrainian territory. It's the Russian forces, the Russian losses are almost entirely military casualties. There basically there are very, very few Russian civilian casualties. So when you talk about Ukrainian deaths here, that's a mixture of civilians. There's a large number of civilians, and there are also, civilians who are missing because the Russians have stolen tens of thousands of children, right? So the Ukrainian losses are a very complicated mix of civilian, um, uh, military, and, buildings, right? There are whole cities that have been laid waste to. The Russian losses, by contrast, are entirely military losses, and they are huge. So it's not like they can throw more people at the problem. They're already having to rent North Koreans to deal with manpower issues. If they want to throw more bodies at the problem, they need to conscript, and that's something that they have really resisted doing, although they're doing it by subtler means than formal conscription. Letting people out of prison in order to enlist, various faux recruitment that's really quite coercive, but they're not drafting people, off the streets as a general matter. So, so their main tool that they're not already using is nuclear. And that's why they're constantly threatening to go nuclear. It's the only real tool. I suppose there are, other weapons of mass destruction they could use, but they're not really very effective, right? Biological weapons are great for, causing pandemics. They're not so great as a battlefield technique. And ditto chemical weapons. So they periodically threaten to go nuclear, and as Bob Woodward has shown in his latest book, there have been times when the U.S. assessment of that has been very concerned. At one point, the intelligence community assessed it as a 50-50 possibility. One group of people who is not concerned about this is the Ukrainians. And I think the explanation for that is pretty simple, which is that it is non-obvious how you would use a tactical nuke in a fashion that is militarily effective. And if the Russians were to use a tactical nuke, that would, at least under the Biden administration, bring U.S. forces into the fight very directly. And the Russians have been told that very clearly and know that. And so, whether that would happen in the 2 months of the waning days of the Biden administration is a more complicated question, I suppose. But I can't imagine that the message has not been conveyed in conjunction with this action to the Russians. And we do have direct communications with the Russians. Don't do anything stupid. The full force of the United States is behind this decision. And of course, Trump can pull the rug out from under that any time, but 2 months of fighting with the United States is not something that the Russians are in a position to do. And so I don't think there's very much the Russians can do in response to this, which is, of course, why I've thought it was the right thing to do for a long time. Now, they are a significant military adversary, and they can cause trouble in all kinds of places in the world. And they have an ally in the incoming administration, or at least they think they do, and I tend to think they're right. Um, so there's a lot of variables. But I do think, you know, I do think you have to govern like you're the government. And this is something that the Biden administration should have done a long time ago. And, fits into a long pattern of them responding to Ukrainian military needs by saying, no, no, you can't do that. No, no, you can't do that. No, no, you can't do that. Okay, go ahead. And I just think it's a pattern that has been destructive from the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And seeing it repeat itself another time is, ironically, every time you criticize it, it's in the context of praising the okay, go ahead move. But the pattern is a very destructive pattern.
What does making an impression on Trump look like? Like, what needs to happen for him to become, okay, they're serious. I'm not messing up with Ukraine.
So I don't know, and I'm sure there is an enormous amount of thought in the Ukrainian government going on about that. And I don't know what would actually make Trump think differently about this. I really don't. And I don't know what Zelenskyy and Trump's conversations have been like. And I don't want, in many areas, I am prepared to say, don't kid yourself, Trump is Trump. The Ukrainians don't have a choice because, if you take what I believe at face value, they have no play. And you can't run a country on the theory that you have no options, right? So they have to act like there's a path for them to deal with the Trump administration. When I look at Matt Gaetz running the Justice Department, I don't have to act like I think there's no option for me to explore there. And I'm an analyst, not a sovereign government or an entity that has to deal with the Justice Department. So I get to say what I really think. You don't have that option if you're the Ukrainian government dealing with your principal military sponsor while you have people across a 600-mile front, and you're being bombarded every day and kids are being killed. It's just not so, they're going to play their hand as though they have a hand to play, even if they don't. And it's our job as analysts to be very understanding of that and to understand that when Zelenskyy kisses Trump's ass, that's a morally and strategically very different thing from when, say, Marco Rubio does it, right? And like, we as American voters, not but we collectively as American voters put them in this position. And how they navigate it is really, from my point of view, not for us to judge. They have a very weak hand. And I think if I were whispering in Zelensky's ear, my position would be show that there's fight in you, because Trump loves nothing more than trotting on the corpses of victims. And so you got to show that you can still take it to the Russians. That means it's really good that you are occupying a bit of Russian territory in Kursk. But remember also that his attention span is short. So, use these long-range weapon systems to do something spectacular within the zone of what's actually militarily effective. We don't want, don't hit civilian targets in Moscow, right? But like, do, make the put on a little bit of a show. And I think that's probably what they will try to do. And what impact it will have on his thinking, I really don't know, because that requires me to spend time in his head, which is, I have few principles, but one of them is I don't spend time in Donald Trump's head.
Can I pivot with another question completely unrelated
Sure. When did this hosting become you interviewing me? This is a change.
Well,
I'm not.
one day.
It's fine. It's fine. It's more than it's the prerogative of the co-host to take things in whatever direction she may want. But yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned that our job as analysts, your job as an analyst, is to say whatever you think is right or wrong. Like, but what do you make of all of these things about the administration suing medias?
Well, so first of all, if the administration wants to sue me, bring it on. I welcome that lawsuit. Look, it's exceptionally dangerous. And I don't think it is a the fabric of First Amendment law in the United States, as you know, is exceptionally protective of the press. And so I think the plausible lines of attack as a litigation matter are not all that promising. But can you tie up operations, particularly small ones, in a great deal of havoc and turmoil and cost? Yes. Will he try to do that in one form or another? I'm sure he will. Now, and will others try to do it on his behalf? I'm sure they will. They already have in a number of areas, and I'm sure they will continue to. That said, I don't think there is a lot of probability. Like, U.S. media is exceptionally diverse, and the bigger entities are very capable of defending themselves. And so I think the real risk is, first of all, which you already saw with the Washington Post, is that ownership, which has other interests, gets spooked and backs off the most provocative things. Why did Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski go to Mar-a-Lago this weekend? I don't know. Am I afraid that MSNBC is going to back off Trump? No. And the reason is very simple, that their their whole identity as a media entity is wrapped up in opposition politics. They have people who genuinely believe in it, including Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. So I'm not really worried about that. Am I worried about the impact on smaller outfits? Absolutely. And so I do think it's a problem. I do think we start with absurdly well protective law to deal with that would have to be dismantled, which would take a lot of time and to dismantle. And so I have more proximate concerns. That said, I'm not unconcerned about it. And am I confident that that we have the tools to defend ourselves in the short term? Yeah, pretty confident. Am I confident that we have the tools to defend ourselves in the long term? No.
Yeah, and I'll ask, and that's for yet another question. Maybe it's not. I'm not asking in good faith, but like, are we confident that the law still matters?
So okay, so let's be precise about what that question means. Let's talk about it in. So first of all, if the question is a lawsuit question, somebody sues, right? In the context of the lawsuit, the law still matters, at least until you get up to the Supreme Court and they change the law, right? Now, that takes a lot of years. So in the short term, in that context, and by the way, I don't really believe that there's a majority on the Supreme Court to gut U.S. First Amendment law. There's no, whatever one says about the conservative majority on the Supreme Court, they are not gunning for the First Amendment, and there's just no evidence that they are. So, Clarence Thomas doesn't like Times v. Sullivan. That's one vote, right? But he loves your ability to spend money to speak, right? So, I don't think we have a First Amendment problem in a profound way at the Supreme Court. Am I worried about extra legal intimidation from people who are confident that the law will not be applied to them? Yes. And that strikes me as a genuine concern that we have to think about how now there are certain natural advantages that we, and by we I mean media organizations, and we are operating in the environment. By we here I mean me and the people around me, in the environment of Washington, D.C., which is a jurisdiction that voted against Trump by 90%. And so I'm not afraid of my neighbors. If I lived in Tennessee, in rural Tennessee or suburban Tennessee, where my friend David French lives, I would be concerned about my neighbors. And by the way, he has had reason to be concerned, as he's written about some of the people around him at various times. And so I think it very much depends who and where you are. But yeah, I think the biggest risk in the short term is extra legal action by people who don't fear consequences. And the most substantial way to gut the rule of law is not by attacking it directly. It's merely by not enforcing it against the people who, and this is why, against the people who do things for you extra legally. And this is why the January 6th pardons are such an alarming development if they should come about, because if you need a mob to do your bidding for you, it pays to have taken care of the last mob that did your bidding for you. There you go.
That was a great, well, it was an interesting answer. I'm not sure if it was a great one. Slightly,
Cheerful.
exactly, yeah, but it's at least we have to know what to prepare for.
Yeah, and I think, look, there's going to be a bunch of left of center people in relatively isolated locales who feel threatened and find that they fall in love with the Second Amendment. You know, I am not a person who believes that my self-protection will ultimately be accomplished by firearms ownership. But I do have friends who feel very differently, particularly friends who are more expert in the use of weapons than I am for one reason or another, and particularly friends who don't live in enclaves where they feel um, protected by the ambience of the environment that they're in. And David French has written about this publicly, that he's a concealed carry guy, um, and wants the world to know it because, people have come for him and his family, and he wants people to know that he is not someone who you should trifle with that way. And I'm not, that's not my instinct. But I think a lot of people are going to feel that way. And, again, the law in the United States, the constitutional law, is very favorable to people who feel that way. And I do think individual circumstances matter. Individual um, uh, uh, location matters. How much time you want to spend training yourself with what sort of firearms matters. Like I like skeet shooting and trap shooting sometimes, but I don't want to spend my time, making sure that I'm adequately competent with handguns in order to have a weapons stockpile in my house. And, but that's my body, my choice kind of situation. I'm not looking to, those considerations are very different if you're somebody who's, former military and, or law enforcement and have, a lot of training with weapons than they are if you're somebody like me. So I think people are going to make very different judgments. And part of it will be atmospheric. Would I feel differently if I were receiving regular threats by people who actually I had reason to think would travel to find me? Yeah, I don't promise to feel the same way at that point. Um, so I think, the general rule, don't panic, make sober assessments of based on your actual situation. Um, don't be paranoid, but don't whistle past graveyards either. is a good one. And by the way, super different if you're somebody who has had violent episodes that you're, with, directed against you, that you will not sleep well if you do not feel like you're in a position to protect yourself, than if you're somebody like me who's basically wanders through life um, cheerfully believing that everything's cool. And, I can be convinced otherwise, but I'm not dealing with a whole lot of post-trauma uh, jitters that are really legitimate for some people, and they sleep better knowing that there is a full system, surveillance protecting their house, and that there is a firearm in an appropriate lockbox near their bed, right? I'm not telling that person that she's irrational. Don't like it's people's circumstance and what it requires to make you feel safe matters. And so I'm you know I live a pretty open life, and I have never been made to regret that. But I really understand that a lot of people aren't in that situation, and those people shouldn't necessarily behave the way I behave. All right, we are going to wrap up. A few things. Number one, we will be back tomorrow. Number
Not
two,
Wednesday.
we will not be back Wednesday. Reminder, we will not be back Wednesday. Number three, tomorrow, the questions will be directed at somebody other than me. Who? I have no idea. Because I never know who's going to show up until they show up.
I feel like someone's kind of traumatized with the day and is going to look up for a guest tomorrow.
No, I'm not traumatized. I'm merely saying that if this show were to turn into a navel-gazing exercise in who is Benjamin Wittes, that would not be, it's fine for an hour. I have no objections to how this show was run, but I merely don't want to make a regular practice out of making this show about me. Which is fine for it to happen today. I'm thrilled. Look, but
You look
I,
traumatized.
I am promising that it will not happen tomorrow as well. Maybe once a week we can talk about me. But Ev, if you show up tomorrow, the questions are all going to be about you. On that cheerful note, because Ev is so much more interesting than I am, and for example, if we were to interview Ev tomorrow, you would find out where Ev has lived this summer, which is much more interesting than where I have lived, and how Ev have maintained her security while living in said location would be a more interesting conversation than how I maintained my security living in this house in Washington.
Involves knives.
Yeah. And then we could also, for example, if we were interviewing Ev tomorrow, and I think I'm guaranteeing that Ev will not show up tomorrow, but if we were interviewing Ev tomorrow, we could ask her about her outrageous plan to become a real estate mogul. And
This is going to happen this week. This is the news that we don't know about yet.
Yeah. So, like, the interview with Ev would be far more interesting than the interview with me. And we'll see. Does Ev show up tomorrow to subject herself to it? Is it the Gaumond under the microscope day? at Dogshirt TV. You will have to tune in tomorrow to find out. So remember, become a part of the fucking revolution in morning television. If you are seeing this on YouTube or hearing it on the podcast and you are wondering, gosh, guys, how can I become the part of the Greek chorus? The answer is become a paid subscriber to Dogshirt Daily. You can do that at, guess where? www.dogshirtdaily.com. And, all we're missing here is you. Cheerio.